Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me all right? Perfect. I'll give it a couple of minutes just to see if any more people join in. Good evening, Benjamin.
Hello there.
Hello there, indeed. Cool. Well, what I'll do is we'll make a start then and see if any other people join while we're going along. Good evening, everyone. As you may know, my name's Rob, part of AvGeeks Assemble. Obviously, we're very keen to sort of support photographers alongside doing our own photography and that sort of thing. So we've done these from time to time just to kind of share our tips and ideas, just to give you guys some insight as to how we approach things and see if you guys can pick up some ideas for yourselves to use going forward. So hopefully what we'll do is we'll give you some new insights through the course of this evening. We'll probably only go on for an hour, maybe an hour and a half, depending on how we do. So what I've done is I've selected a bunch of shots from 2022. So this is kind of a editing review video. I've These aren't necessarily my favourite shots or necessarily my best shots, but I've put out some shots that could be a bit of a challenge, or shots that show different types of image that we've caught to try and sort of vary it out a little bit. So I'll preface it by sort of saying that the way I edit these tonight is I will use the same sort of method that I normally use, but I edit a picture differently depending on when I'm editing it. So what I edit tonight might not be how I've edited these pictures in the past, or how you might have seen them on Instagram. I kind of just go with feeling when I'm editing every single one, but hopefully it will be interesting, informative, and you'll get something from it. Feel free to shout out if you want any little bits covered in the chat, and I'll see if I can oblige. I'll try and cover all elements as best I can. And as you can see, we've got Ben in the chat. So Ben is another AvGeeks member. So feel free to chat, ask questions in the chat, and we'll sort of do what we can for you. So we'll start off by going into one of these, the first shot on here, which is a F4 Phantom from Duxford. Now, the reason I've chosen this one is because quite often when we've done these before, we do a lot of focus on flying shots, but part of the joy of aviation photography is that airplanes can be on the ground as well. Museum shots themselves can be quite challenging, and in my view require a completely different style of editing to sky shots. So I thought I'd go with this one just to kind of do something a little bit different for you. Now, this is one of my favourite angles in all of Duxford. This is the Duxford American Air Museum. So this is one of my favourite shots I've taken many times. It's one of those shots where it's a very cluttered museum, but if you've got a nice wide angle lens, which is what I've used on this one, you can get a really good shot of this plane, and the colour scheme just seems to catch up all the lighting as it comes in from the sides and from the back. So it's a nice plane to start off with. Obviously, as you can tell, it's a little bit dark, so we're going to have to play around with the exposure. We're probably going to have to try and remove a little bit of noise and just sort of bring it out a bit. But what we'll do is we'll make a start and go from there. Now, what I always do when I start on this, I tend to set my profile corrections and remove any fringing. So I use chromatic aberration, enable lens profiles. Now, what you might see, I will say I use a Loop Deck Plus, so you might see multiple commands happening at the same time. They can all be done by mouse and keyboard. I just do it on a Loop Deck now because it's kind of like become second nature to me now. So what I'm not necessarily going to do is start on the exposure on this point just yet. Normally I work from the top downwards. So on this one, I just want to try and work out what we're going to get it to look like before I worry about the lighting and that, because what I might do on this is focus the lighting purely on the plane and work elsewhere. So what we're going to do is, some of the highlights are quite blown, so we'll start with the highlights and try and bring some of those back. Obviously I'm not going to bring too much back. What you will find is sometimes with shots like this is I don't put a lot of focus on the global editing. I'll do it mainly on just the sort of the plane on itself, just so that I don't do too much with the background. But we'll do a little bit of highlights there. And we'll add a little bit of contrast into the scene, so we'll just roll that up and just see. What I tend to do is I tend to go over the top and then come back down to where a level I think I like it. Because normally what I've learned through doing this is, if I decide, you know what, oh, I really like 30 contrast or whatever, when you look at the photo afterwards, it turns out it's too far. So I always go up to where I feel it looks nice, and then I just sort of roll it back just a little bit, because it then gives us a more sort of natural feeling. So we'll start around there. Now, where we're going to go next is we're going to look at the texture and the clarity a bit here, because I want to make this kind of quite a really sort of crisp, punchy shot, just to kind of make the planes separate out a little bit. So we'll start off by adding some clarity in, and there you can see it's sort of bringing in a little bit of punch and making it a little bit less faded. So again, just roll it back a little bit, because 20 feels about right. And it's quite a dull shot in here, so I'm going to see what we can do with vibrance just to give it a little bit more life. It's quite grey at the moment, and there's lots of colours in the planes above, but if we overall in the vibrance feels a little bit too much, so maybe we'll just up it a little bit, and we'll play around with the saturation. That's probably too much, and again probably just around there. What I tend to do is I tend to play around sometimes with different knobs just to see if I can get the vibe that I want first, and then sort of refine it on an individual basis. So I think what we are going to do here is we're going to bring the texture up a little bit, because this is what I tend to use instead of sharpening. I'm not a huge fan of sharpening. I feel that sharpening raises the noise too much, where I feel like texture doesn't as much. So we're going to raise the texture up probably around there. Feels just about fine. And then what I'm going to do is, you can see there's a little bit of noise in this one, but this is mainly because this is a very dark dark space, and I think this was handheld, this shot. I don't think it was on a tripod, so it's a bit of luck of the draw. So what we're going to do is we're going to try and lose some of that noise, but we don't want to lose too much detail. So what we're just going to do, we're just going to turn the luminance up just a touch, probably no more than 30. I tend to find if you go more than 30, you start to smooth the whole thing out, and it just feels a little bit, I don't know, just odd. Pastel-y would be the feeling. So I'll go back there, and that feels about right. And now looking at the white balance, it feels a little bit kind of green and blue in this one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just push the temperature up just a little bit, just to kind of bring some of that back. Not too far, because we don't want it to be too orange. So probably somewhere around there feels about right. And now what we're going to do is we're going to play with the colours a little bit now, or the exposure a little bit. So I think, as I said, it's quite dark. So we'll just lift it a little bit, but not too much, just enough to bring it in. And then we'll raise the shadows just a touch, but not, again, not too much. I don't want to blow it out completely. But what I want to do is I want to try and preserve the blacks in the shadows, so I will bring them down. There is an interesting tip with this. If you use Lightroom, if you press, it might not be this one. Yes, here we are. So if you press J in Lightroom, it brings up your blacks and your highlights. Obviously, what the reds refer to highlights. So that's when you've got a blown highlight, and then effectively what you would do is what you would do is you play around with your highlights to bring them back, and see there you're unblowing it. If you push it the other way, you're blowing them out even more. So that's a useful little tip if you don't really understand highlights and shadows, just to kind of play around and bring them back in. Sometimes you can't avoid it. Sometimes they'll just be overblown, and shadows is equally the same. I suppose it's more about the blacks really. So it's trying to play around with it. Now sometimes it's not perfect. Sometimes you can just work it out by eye a bit better, and sometimes I ignore it completely. So that's what we're going to do. Is we're going to see there, if we push the blacks down, we're making it too black. So probably what we want to do is just do a little bit over. But then again, that doesn't feel right to me. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to roll it back a little bit. Excellent. Now what I'll do is, while I go through the process of doing this, I'm always going to watch the histogram, because you kind of want everything to sort of sit roughly in the middle with no real peaks on either side here, which would be your obviously your blacks, your whites, your highlights and your shadows. You don't want to blow it out too much. So it's got a little bit darker since we were going around with. So what I'm going to do is just lighten it up a little bit. Now I'm not totally convinced that I've got all the highlights on the plane. So what I am going to do is I'm going to use the masking tool. And then this one I'm going to use the object mask, because there's quite a lot of subjects in there. So it might pick up the subjects. The object mask was fairly recently added into Lightroom. And it's usually quite clever at picking things up. That's not too bad. Obviously, as it goes without saying, with all masks, the more time you spend on it, the better it's going to be. So I'm not going to go too much in this one, but it's picked up the main part of the body where I was concerned about the highlights. So that's fine by me. So we're just going to roll those highlights down a little bit. And that feels a little bit better. Maybe what I'll do is, while we're in there, I might just give the plane just a little bit more in terms of texture, just to make it stick out a little bit more. Maybe just a little bit of clarity. Good. Now I think I like what that's doing. Now the only problem I find with this is, obviously there's lots of other things going on in this picture. So you've got obviously got the B-52 there, the F-15, and you've got all the planes on the ceiling. You've got the simulator over here. So what I want to do is I want to kind of sort of get rid of that a little bit. So what I'm going to use is I'm going to use the radial mask, and I'm going to invert that radial mask. Now the normal radial mask, if I select it, that's what it's selecting. It'll select the body of the plane. But what I want it to do is I want it to select everything but that area of the plane. So I will invert it. And now everything that I edit will be editing around the plane, or anything but the plane. So what I want to do here is, obviously, as you can see, I want to lose a bit more of the back. So what I'm going to do is, where I've raised the exposure elsewhere, I want to bring that back down. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this tool off, so there we are. So I've brought the back down. I'm making it focus on the plane a little bit. I think we need to be a little bit more precise with it, just because I'm not sure I'm liking that. So we're going to just expand that out just to pick up the body of the plane. That's better. And what we do is quickly just check it's balanced, just to now we can see there's a little bit of noise on the aeroplane where I've been fiddling with it, so I'm going to go into the plane and sort of remove a little bit of noise. Again, I'm not going to go too far because I don't want it to sort of become all pastely, but that's just enough. There's always going to be a little bit of noise on this because of the sensor on my camera and the fact it was handheld and dark, so I think that's quite good. And maybe what I'll do, just to be a bit more, I'll crop it in just to be a bit more aggressive. And that is a shot that I like. I've taken this one many times, many different angles and many different lighting settings, and this is one that I particularly like. Again, I'm worried maybe there's a little bit too much green, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to raise the tint ever so slightly just to make it a little less green, and that feels a lot more natural. I think what I'll do is I'll just raise the exposure of the whole thing just a little bit, just so that the plane itself has got a little bit of glow. And for that picture works for me, I think. As you can see, this is one of the questions I often get asked is what I do about things in pictures at museums. I know a lot of people would be sort of painstaking and they'd take this rope out. Now, for me, I don't tend to do stuff like that all that often. As far as I'm concerned, it's a museum. There's going to be ropes protecting it. I'd rather there weren't ropes there. But for a shot like this, I don't feel it takes away from the picture. If there is a rope or sort of a screen which is very obviously takes away from the picture, then I will use a bit of Photoshop and I'll crop it out. But in most cases, museum shots, you know, it is what it is. They are what's there. So I'd rather not go and delete it all just for the sake of deleting it. You know, you can't have perfection. It's about reflecting the plane in the scene that it's in. And for me, all the bits around it that show it's in a museum is as important as the plane itself. Bear with me a second, technical issues. Perfect. Right, so what we're going to do is we're going to move on to another shot. Now we'll go on to this next shot, because this shot, whilst it looks good, does take a bit of work to sort of get it looking right. This is at RAF Lakenheath, F-15C, from the forest entrance at Lakenheath. So as you can see, it's one of those days where it's kind of, the sun was kind of in a position where it sort of makes everything a little bit darker, and you've got to kind of roll everything back to try and stop it from blowing out, so you end up with a slightly darker picture. But you've got a nice angle on the plane. The plane's relatively sharp. I believe this is before I upgraded my lens, so this is the last sort of actions of my Tamron lens. And you've got some of the jelly from behind it and everything from behind it, so I'm going to try and preserve as much of that as I can. So what we'll do with this one is we'll do what we did before, and we'll start by fixing the profile and removing any chromatic aberration, which seems to have done a relatively simple job of. Now this one we are going to start with the exposure, because it needs to come up quite considerably. So what we'll do is we'll push that up just a bit. Now I think what that's done is that might blow out the airplane a little bit too much. So what we'll do is we'll try and treat that a little bit differently from the rest of the plane, the rest of the scene. If not, we'll roll the exposure back and we'll treat the sky separately. But what we'll try and do is we'll try and bring some of the highlights back globally first, just to kind of bring the sky back so it feels a bit more natural. There's not really any shadows to play with here. what we might do is we'll use a little bit of dehaze just to kind of create a little bit of separation between the plane and the sky. Normally dehaze you'd use if there's sort of like a foggy situations, but I find it's quite useful in creating like a bit of depth in the scene, especially with aeroplanes, because it just kind of makes them step out a little bit more. It's almost like, you know, just cutting through any haze you might get, which can be quite common at Lakenheath. So what we're going to do with this one, I think we're going to have to do most of the work. It's going to be on the plane itself, realistically. So what we'll do is we'll go in this one. We'll try a subject mask this time, see if it picks up the subject correctly. And it has done pretty well. Got a little bit there which we don't particularly want to keep in because everything else will be affected by it. So what we'll do is we'll go into that mask, we'll subtract, we'll use a brush. I mean, actually in this one we can probably use luminance, but it might be a bit too close because of the plane. Sometimes you find with the planes the grey and the blue can create an awkward sort of crossover which the mask can't really work out. As you can see there, one auto masked around it, or just there like that. But that should be good enough for what we're looking to do. So what we'll do is we're going to go back in, because for some reason Lightroom doesn't like you moving and zooming within a mask, which I haven't quite worked out. So I think what we're going to do is, I feel like the plane's a bit too bright, so we're going to roll the exposure back on the plane, which is another reason why you want the mask to be quite precise, because obviously if you have an area of the mask which becomes dark on the background, it will become quite obvious. So always keep an eye out for that, especially around, if you're editing a plane, areas like this can quite often, sort of where the sharp sort of angles are, can quite often be left in the mask. You want to clean those out, otherwise you'll end up affecting everything else when you're masking. If you're doing something like sharpening, it's not so much of a problem, but if you start playing around with sort of highlights and exposure and that sort of thing, it will become very obvious that you've put a mask on it. So got the exposure down. Let's try and have a look at the highlights, because the highlights are blown, especially around the cockpit area. So we just roll those back just a bit, not too much, but that's quite nice. And I think what we'll do is we'll crank the texture up just a little bit, probably around there, just to make it punch a little bit. I think we want to add a little bit of contrast in as well. And that's not too bad. I might crop in just a little bit. And just check for any dust spots, not on this occasion, which makes a change. And a relatively simple edit, that one, even though it can be, well, it's a relatively simple picture, but it's not necessarily a simple edit, because there's many different ways you can edit it, especially when it's darker. But quite often I prefer to have a shot that's darker, because I can do more to save it in Lightroom and Photoshop than you can if it's sort of heavily overexposed. Now I think what I might do is just raise the tint on this a little bit, just to kind of remove a little bit of the blueness to it. Maybe I'll just raise the temperature just a little, just so the plane doesn't look blue, which is better. There we go. Now there is a bit of noise in the sky, but I think when you're looking at it objectively you can't really notice it all that well. Whilst I'm at it, how's the stream quality for everyone? I've set it up so it should be exporting at sort of like 4K now. So you should be able to, if you look on your YouTube settings, you should be able to watch it at 1440p. So you should be able to get some really nice resolution on this. Hopefully all the sliders and everything you can read correctly. Let me know if you're having any problems with that. Perfect. Yeah, so just comparing this to the original shot, all I've really done is sort of raised it up and tried to sort of maintain the highlights on the plane but brighten the whole scene up. I mean, what I could potentially do is use a bit of something to get that exhaust in it back into it, but I'm not necessarily that fussed about that on this one. So what we'll do is we'll move on to another one. Perfect. Right, okay, so what I will do is we'll look at this shot here. This is from a different day. This one was in April, I believe, April of last year, and this is the F-35A at RAF Lakenheath. Now, this one isn't perfectly sharp, but it's sort of sharp enough. I've got sort of two versions of sharp. I've got sharp and then there's acceptably sharp, and this is what I would call acceptably sharp. If I'm going to use this on something like Instagram or in a photo book or something, you're really not going to notice the slight loss of resolution if you're zooming in at 200%. So what we'll do is we're going to look at this one, and this one's going to be quite similar to the other one, or there's a bit more going on in the sky we can try and play with. And obviously it's a different kind of plane, so I think what I'm going to start off with is I'm going to play around with the crop first, because what I might do is potentially extend the scene on this one, but I don't know yet. It depends how much resolution is lost when I crop it. So I'll do my lens correction, and then we'll do a crop probably somewhere in the middle of the scene, a little bit like that, and that's probably all right, so we won't worry about too much about that. So we've got exposure's not too bad on this one, but we'll pump it up a little bit, not too far. And then I think we probably want to try and get the sky back in on this one. So this is one where we'll play with the highlights, bring that down, and I think again with this one we'll crack into the dehaze, just like that. Now, as you can see, it's made the plane look a little bit funny, but we'll fix that separately. So I think what we'll do on this one is, obviously, as there's not a lot in the background apart from those few clouds, we're not going to worry about the texture and the clarity so much on this one. We'll try and look at the vibrance a bit, see if we can make the whole thing just pop a little bit more. There we go. So that brings the sky out quite nicely, but obviously the plane has gone a bit funny coloured from the dehaze. So what we're going to do is we're going to, again, treat the plane separately. And let's create a nice outline. What I found since they've added the select object mask for planes in flight, I feel like it does a better job of doing the masking. So that's something I've got used to. So what I'm going to do with this one, obviously you saw the issues that it brought in. You can see it's obviously made the plane a little bit more yellow through the dehazing. So what I'm going to do is just on the plane, I'm going to roll back that dehaze, because we don't need to dehaze the plane. So I'm just going to roll it back, probably my sort of, let me see, what did we do? It was dehaze of 20. So what we'll do, we'll roll it back to about half that. So that's -10. So it still catches a little bit of punch, but it's taken away all of the damaging colours. And then what we want to do is we want to sharpen a little bit more with the texture. This one I kind of want to make this punch quite a bit, so we're going to go with so the reason I use a white background and not a grey one is because so often most air shows or anything I go to, the sky is generally grey. So I feel like when you've got it against a white background, the edits you're making feel clearer. I don't think there is a set a set one. I think it comes down to a lot of personal preference. I've always just kind of gone with white. I have tried working with black. Black doesn't work for me at all. It just makes the whole thing feel darker. And the greys, again, you know, if I'm editing on a grey sky, it doesn't really work for me. I just feel like it sort of works a lot better on white, but it's one of those personal preferences, really. It's what I've always done, and it's what I'll continue to do unless I can find a reason to change, whether my eyes change or something. That might do it, but I think from where we are, I think I'll stick with white. But yeah, I think it's more of a personal preference thing. I don't think there's any hard and fast science behind it. I think if there was a hard and fast science, we wouldn't have the options. Obviously, you can see the different options here, can't you? So, I mean, I don't feel like that's right. I think also part of the reason I do it is so that if I'm gonna, because a lot of stuff I do with these I either put on a website, where I tend to like, if I build a website, I tend to have it white with sort of black text and that sort of thing, because I feel like it steps it out. And also, if I have a photo book or a print, it's going to be on white paper generally. So if I edit it on white, I know that if I'm editing it here, when I put it on to a sort of a photo book, it's going to look there or thereabouts, and I don't have to make allowances for white paper. So it's kind of a sort of partly because I'm just used to it, and partly because I feel like it's a reflection of what I'm going to be printing it onto if I print it. So yeah, so we've got that one, and that's, again, it's another relatively simple edit, that one, which comes out quite nice. There's some photos you can do really sort of more extreme edits on. The next one I'm going to do, you can do some more extreme edits on. So what we'll do is we'll do another shot. Now this was from a similar period of Lakenheath last year, and as you can see, we've got the big dark clouds in the background, we've got the burners on the back. So yeah, this is one that I've played around with and done very different edits on with it. So this one could be something else we do quite differently. So what I'm going to do is we're going to start off with the lens profile and chromatic aberration. Now this one sort of exposure wise, it's sort of all right. It's sort of everything sort of fair to middling, so I'm not going to do too much of that just yet. What I am going to do is, I know there's I'll check for dust spots, there's none there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it in, sort my crop out, because I want it to sort of be very in the middle of a crop with a diagonal sort of angle punching towards the sky. This one I am going to be quite heavy with a dehaze and clarity on, because I want to bring out that sky, and I just want it all to look quite sort of artistic. So we'll start by bringing back some of the highlights first, just to bring back some of the sky. And we don't want to go too far because it'll just make it grey. And then what we're going to do is we'll crack into the dehaze with something like that. Now, this one is another one where I'm going to bring it back on the airplane, I think. The one thing you always have to check when you're playing around with dehaze is you keep having to check your dust spots, because the more dehaze you do, the more dust spots become relevant. So we've made it all a little bit darker, but we can work with that. We want that to be sort of fairly dark. I think what we probably want to do is add a bit of clarity in, just to see if we can make the sky pop out a bit. And then a little bit of contrast, probably not that much contrast. So I think what we're going to do is do a little bit of work on the plane here as well. Because we want the plane to stand out a bit. So what we're probably going to do is we're probably going to roll back the dehaze on this one. What I want to do is remove that. So we'll do that. And you'll see here an example of what I mentioned before, where if you allow the mask to do it itself, there are these little areas, these little chinks in and out that it won't necessarily be able to pick up. So what you want to do is you want to manually sort of go in and change that. Because what you'll find is if you end up doing that, if you end up then going and brightening the plane up, for example, the whole thing will be brighter. And it also feels there's a lot of extra. So it feels like there's a lot of extra fringing. Now you can sometimes get that if you do an object selection. So what we're going to do is we're going to delete that. And then we'll go for a subject instead. And again, it's a lot tighter around the edge with this one, but you've still got these little areas. So what we'll do is we'll subtract the brush. Sometimes if you've got an auto mask on, you only have to just click and it will work it out itself. Sometimes, yes, it'll just eat in a little bit, but that's not too bad. We'll just check everywhere else on the plane's okay. Right, we're going to have to remove this again. So what we'll do on this one is because the dehaze is quite heavy, we don't want it so heavy on the plane, so we're going to roll that back just a bit. As you can see, that just brings it out a little bit. We don't want to go all the way, but just to make it stand out a little bit. We want to add some texture into that. We want to go quite hard on the texture. Now we'll look at sharpness, but I don't feel like sharpness really adds. I feel like sharpness just adds, it just feels a little bit false sharpness. It's just not one of those things I enjoy. But what I might do is might use it on some of the other ones to sort of show some tips behind it. So what you can see here is you can see some minor sort of areas, a little fringing there, which is where that area of the mask is still picked up. So if I was being really pedantic, I'm not going to be so pedantic today, but I would go back in and clean that up. Yes, you can see the difference there. You can see that line where I've brightened the airplane up, and that's the unmasked area. So you want to always, where there's these tiny little gaps, it really struggles sometimes. So what we'll do is we'll just go along here. That's better. Most people probably won't notice, but it's something I'll notice, and it just feels a little bit off to me. So that's not too bad. So what I think we'll do is we'll raise the exposure just a little bit. Now that we've done anything, and I still think we could do more with the sky. I still feel like there's more that we can get out of it to add to the drama. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a sky mask and see what that picks up. It has removed the plane, but it's still not perfect, so we'll minus the subject. And this is another thing you always have to keep an eye out for, is when with cockpits, for example. So with this one, it's not so bad because the lighting around it is quite similar. But what you'll find sometimes is if you brighten up an aeroplane and you don't brighten up the sky, you'll end up with this cockpit which doesn't really match the sky behind it. And obviously, you know, then it looks like you've edited it. So what you want to do is you need to try and remove the canopy in it, because obviously it's glass, so you'll see through it. I think in this case it's not so bad, but we'll have a look and see if we can. Right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do that just as a comparison. Yes, it's not so bad, but obviously you can see here where I've brightened up the aeroplane in comparison to the background, it is brighter than that area behind. So this is always something to be wary of. It's not so, a lot of time like this you'll get away with it, but sometimes it can be very, very noticeable. So what I'm going to do in this instance is, because I've spotted it, I'm going to just quickly and this is something you'll also find will happen on biplanes, because it will, when it selects the subject, it will select that whole area between the two wings, sometimes between the wires, so you'll end up with some weird colours there if you're not careful. So that's always something to keep an eye on. There. Obviously, you can do better masking than that if you spend your time on it, but that's fine. And there, it doesn't look like it's out of place because I've removed any slightly odd things. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go back into the sky, and we'll just kind of, in this instance, we might add the cockpit back in, but we'll see how we go. So I feel like we want to try and do a bit more with the sky, so let's whack some clarity in there, see what that does. This is quite nice. It's starting to bring out the clouds. Now, what I quite often do with the background is, because that'll add, I'm quite heavy-handed with it. So then sometimes what I'll do is I'll remove a bunch of the noise, because it will bring out the noise. And it's not so much of a problem in the sky. So that feels about right. And as you can see, the cockpit here still feels quite natural. I think it's because this area of lighter sky is here. Now I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to raise the temperature just a little bit, because I tend to like my images on the warmer side. I like to cut out the blues. Probably about there. It feels like grey. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to again check for any dust spots. No, none at all. And then that, for me, feels about right. So let's compare it to what it started with and what it started like. As you can see, we've not really, it's not a drastic edit. All we've done really is accentuate all of the elements of the image rather than going completely over the top in it. So it's effectively, it's a true to life edit, but we've obviously made it a bit more dramatic and just kind of brought out the bits like the burners and the fluff on the wings, and just called it all the sort of shapes and that in the sky. So that's quite a good little one there. Now I'll just try and see what we can go through next. And we'll do, this is an interesting one, because this is one that can always be quite a challenge, and that is a sunset shot. Now this is one that is, this is the first time I'd actually shot an RC135, so I was sort of quite trigger happy on this one, so I've got loads of photos. But this was in April last year. There was a bunch of us AvGeeks were there, and it was a very unpredictable weather, shall we say. All these clouds were sort of individual snowstorms that were dotted around the sky, and one minute you'd be in bright cold sunshine, the next minute you'd be in a snow flurry that was forcing you to hide next to a burger van. So this was sort of later on in the day. At the end of the day, we thought, you know, it's going to be kind of the day was almost over, we was getting ready to go back, and then we just sort of heard over the radio this is on its way back, so we decided to rush over, try and catch it in the sunset. So I've got a few shots of this one. I've got some more with some more dramatic cloud formations behind it, but the plane is quite small. So what I want to do is I'm going to play with this and just kind of see what we can go with it. So we'll start off with the lens profiling and chromatic aberrations, just to sort that out. Sometimes you'll see that it'll make a massive difference. Sometimes it'll make very little difference at all. But it's one of those things you should always do, because they're always, each lens has some foibles to do with the chromatic aberration, its profiling. So it's always good to put that in first, just so you can get the you get it as right as possible. So where we're going to start here now, this is one where we're going to have to try and treat the plane differently, because the plane is quite sort of dark in comparison to the rest of the sky, quite backlit. So what we're going to have to try and do is try and bring that back without sort of ruining everything else. So this is one where we're going to have to treat the plane separately, but what we're going to start with is we're going to start by bringing the global highlights down to sort of bring in the sky. And the one thing I'm going to do with this one is I'm going to sort of go and focus on the fact that when we was there was lots of oranges, lots of sort of purples in that sort of sunset. So we're going to push the color temperature up to bring those oranges back, and then we're going to push the tint up just to bring some pinks in. Not too far, we don't want to go too far. So that's quite nice from there. And what we'll try and do is, I think what we'll try and do is we'll try and mask that cloud, just to give the cloud a bit of a because that cloud is as much a subject as the plane is. So I'm going to see if we can do anything with that, if it will let me. There we go, that's good. So what we're going to do is we're going to crank the dehaze up a little bit, probably not that much, just a little bit, and then we'll add a whole load of clarity in. Again, not too much. I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, because there's some odd sort of areas here where you've got the wispy bits that are picked up, I'm going to, for the purpose of this, I think we're going to remove the stuff on the edges, just because it will blend better with the sky. Probably not that much. So that's, yeah, these bits up here we want to kind of just make it a little bit cleaner. So what we'll do is we'll add some clarity in here as well. Then I feel like that, I don't think I like that now that I've done it. So I want to try and do is try and take the dehaze out, because I've made it quite blue. That's better. So we're gonna bring the shadows up globally on this as well, just a little bit, and then I think we're going to add a bunch of vibrance in, maybe not that much, just to kind of do that, just to bring everything in a little bit. And now we're going to shift our focus to the plane. Because we need to try and sort of bring that back in, try and do it. And obviously, as you can see here, there's some slight areas where it's not picked it up. So we might be able to, in this case, subtract it by color range. So and then what that should do, that's not going to work. Sometimes if the plane is a dramatically different color to the sky, you can rely on that to do it. So the other option is luminance. So this will be based on your brightness and whatever, so that might work. That has done a rubbish job, actually. So what we'll have to do is, that's something we'll have to do manually, but I'm not going to do it. What I'll do is we'll do it on this bit here, because it should hopefully, there we are, should be fairly easy. Right, so there we need to do it. And there as well. Again, I can't stress enough how precise you need to be with the mask. I know one thing that I've spotted on what you see quite often on Instagram is people have just gone, oh, there's a mask, so they'll just click on a mask and it's very obvious that they've done it, And I think it can take away from the shot. A good mask can make a shot even better. A bad mask just can kill a photo. So if you're going to use the mask tool, spend as much time as you can to take out any little bits that are going to make it obvious that you've masked. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back into that mask, and we're going to try and bring the exposure up on the plane. We don't want to go too far because we don't want it to. See, as you can see with this, there's all that fringing. So what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and do a better mask, and we'll see if we can get it. If selecting the subject will be better. That's a lot tighter again. So what we'll do is we'll see how that looks. That looks better. But as you can see, this is a prime example where it's not picked out all these bits, where it's left that in the mask. You can see the very obvious differences, and that will be that's the sort of thing that can show a sort of time spent or a rushed one. So we're going to go back in, we're going to take that out, and immediately you can see the differences. And the sky colour behind, and it's always worth spending the time just to get it right. As with most things, if it's worth doing, it's worth doing right. So you always want to just make sure your masks are right. Not so bad at the top there, so that's all right. But in here, this is a very obvious case. So this is where you'll see, for example, this is just a gap between the flap. The mask hasn't picked it up. So all it's done is it's assumed that this whole square here is part of the plane, so it hasn't factored in for the fact that there is a different colour behind it, and that is a dead giveaway of a masking. So you just want to go back in there, and then so you can see, and it's one of the things very obvious. Even if it's just a slight little one, so you can see it just there, ever so slightly. That, I mean, I don't know how well it's come across, but you can see it, and if you just kind of go in there and just dab it out, you can see the difference there. It is one of my bugbears, so I can be quite anally retentive about it, but there we go. So I think that's quite nice, actually. I think I might add a little bit of additional punch to the airplane just by adding some texture in, just to kind of make it stand out against the sky a little bit more. And what we could do is we're going to crop it in as well. Now I want to keep as much of the cloud in this one as I can, whilst keeping the plane sort of front and centre. Probably not too centre, because it's become a running joke that I like my planes to fly to somewhere rather than just being plonked in the middle of something. So that's quite a nice shot. I like that one. I might just pump the overall exposure up just a little bit. And that looks okay. It's quite a nice edit. Again, this one, what I might do in this instance is add a radial gradient just to kind of bring everything else down a little, not too much, just to create a little bit more separation. And there we go. Again, as you can see there, again, this is a relatively simple edit on this one where I've tried to sort of keep the plane in there and just try to bring out a bit more of the drama in the clouds, a bit more of the colours. Sometimes my shots can be quite a lot of my editing is quite simplistic. I like to sort of just kind of present what's there rather than being overly over the top in some edits. I do like to do creative edits from time to time, but I do like to try and keep it as real to life as possible, especially if it's a nice shot that's got naturally good colours in it. And I'm sure Tim will remember this day. It was incredibly cold. You'll see down the side here, I've got a hell of a lot of various different. Oh, hello, that's quite nice. I've got loads of presets from various different things. Quite often, I will use a preset as a sort of starting point, and then work from there. I've got my own set of presets that I use that effectively just. There's one I use which is just effectively it just enhances all parts, so it just makes it. It's what. For me, it's the equivalent of the JPEG display on the back of your camera, so it just kind of turns a RAW into the look of just an unedited JPEG, and then I can go and edit from there, just to kind of push and pull, because I find it's easier to look at a picture that's sort of semi-edited than it is to go completely from RAW. So one other thing that we also get lost as is at air shows is we quite often focus just purely on the flying aircraft, when there's a hell of a lot of other stuff going on as well. So one of the other things is always keen to keep a look at is aircraft taxiing, moving around. This one was from Riyadh. This is one of the Royal Air Force A400s coming in on arrivals day, on one of the arrivals days. So we've got a nice head-on shot of it. So this is the sort of shot where, you know, it's important to have, because it's nice to have sort of flying airplane shots, but you always want to have shots which kind of show off the whole event and tell the story. It's like, it might not be like an award-winning shot in itself, but if you was to tell the story of the air tattoo in, say, 10 photos, like a 10 photo roll on Instagram, you want to have an array of different shots that tell the story over the course of that day. So it's not just look, oh, flying plane, oh, flying plane, oh, flying plane. You want to be able to spread the story, and this is what these sort of taxiing shots do for me. So this is one of those. Obviously, yeah, we've clipped off the propellers, but you know, it's not the end of the world. You can play with that. We've still got the front of the plane sort of as central as possible at the time. So what we're going to do is we're going to start work on this one. We're going to go with sort your chromatic aberration and your lens profile out, and then with this one it's slightly off balance. I think I was standing on a ladder, or trying to stand on a ladder, let's put it that way. So we're going to try and look at the auto leveling, which doesn't quite do it for me, so I'm going to roll it just a little bit more and try. What I try and do is, I've kind of got a lot of people say the horizon should be straight. Now I've got a sort of thought process behind that, and it's that if the subject is overwhelming the image to the fact that it would be detrimental to the image to have the horizon level, then have focus on the subject. If you've got something like a big wide landscape, or it's very obvious that you need to level the horizon, then level the horizon. But in this case, this will be slightly, the leveling of the plane is more important than sort of the horizon behind it, especially given that it's blurred out. So what we'll do is we'll start there, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus in. I'm probably going to crop in even more on this one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with editing it. Now there is some stuff going on in the sky which I want to try and pull back, so we'll start off by trying to see if we can pull it back with highlights. That's probably too much. Now there are some shots, so this is a prime example, where I won't focus on the airplane specifically. I'll add all the clarity and the texture to the whole image, because I think it'll add a real good punch to the whole thing. So I think what I want to do is I want to try and create a little bit of separation in the background and see if we can bring out some more of the jelly from the engine. So we'll push the dehaze up a little. Don't want to go too far. But then we're going to go quite heavy on the clarity with this one, I think. I think that really adds to some of the punch. And we're going to add some sort of sharpening to the edges with the texture. And it gives it a real dark, brooding shot, and I just think it really brings out that the jelly and the props. We're gonna. It's a little bit dark, so we're going to try and push the exposure up just a little. Probably not too much. So let's try a tighter crop as well. And that's quite nice. And there's some shots I like to punch it full of clarity, and I like to desaturate it. So especially with a big grey aeroplane like this, I think you can get away with desaturating. So what we're going to do is we're going to try a bit of desaturation. Not too much, just enough, just to make it sort of take away some of the vibrance in the shot. Well, I think that's really quite nice, and it's done quite a lot. And I will double check again for dust spots, because dust spots are the bane of my existence. Although I do have a secret weapon for dust spots now, but I don't think any of these are too dust spotty. So again, yeah, so this is a lovely example of a shot which is just a relatively simple shot, but in the context, if you were to put 10 photos on Instagram, this is one that will really sort of punch. It tells the story, and you can see we've gone from just a relatively flat sort of A400 shot into this one where I've kind of compressed it in a little bit. I might even crop it in a little bit further, but it looks like it's a plane that's stalking you, coming straight at you, and I really like it. I really like the way by going in heavy with the clarity, we've picked up all the haze coming out of the engines and all that sort of stuff. I really like it. So what I might do is just play around with that a little bit, just to kind of balance it a little bit. But that's really nice. This is one of my favourite shots from the arrivals at Riyadh. I just like it. It's how it's a simple shot, but it tells a big story. And then equally, a lot of the static shots tend to get missed. Now, this is one of the F-35. This is one that could be sort of just kind of. This is another one where people will say, "Oh, well, all the people in the background. There's all the people in the background." Well, yeah, there is, but it's an air show. You know, you expect people to be in a photo at an air show, so you know, I just live with stuff like that, especially when there's busy backgrounds. You know, it is what it is. You know, I mean, it would be nice to sit there and just go through and cut out all these people out, all the stands in the background, but what would it achieve? I'd just have a bare background with no real scene of interest. So what I'm going to do with this one is I'm going to treat this quite similarly to the other one. I'm going to go with a tighter crop on this one. So what I am going to do is I'm going to take this into Photoshop, because as you can see here, there is a wing, which is, I think it was a Mustang, isn't it? Or was that the Sabre? I can't remember what was part there. So I'm going to go in and take that out. They do have a clone tool in Lightroom now, but it's not all that good. So I'm going to use it in Photoshop. But what I'll do is I'll worry about the chromatic aberration and the profile correction here, because that's something you can't do it when you export it back into Lightroom. It's a sort of quirk with Lightroom and Photoshop integration. So we're going to pop it over into Photoshop. Hopefully Photoshop will pop up on the screen. If not, I'll have to Can you see Photoshop, or has it decided to not? Right, there we are. Right. Can you all see Photoshop okay? The sky does look beautiful, and it was a lovely warm day. This was in the morning, I think. The only problem is sometimes when you just got a plain blue sky, there's nothing of real interest in the sky. So what we're going to do is we're going to go in. See, this is the offending wing. So I know I said it's another thing, so I don't always want to delete it. It's like if there was more of a plane in there, I wouldn't delete it. But as it is just sort of this bit of wing, I feel like it's just a distraction. So if I do think it's something that's a distraction, it will come out. So I'm going to try and get in there without removing his head. I don't know why we've got these weird guidelines on. Content aware. Bish, bash, bosh. And that's done a pretty good job, actually. Just those last couple of bits. Bosh, bosh, gone. Perfect. So what we'll do is we'll save that back into Photoshop, into Lightroom. And there we go. No wing. The one thing to always remember is if you do crop something like that out, is always check for a shadow, because the last thing you want is just this random shadow that will just be kind of sort of sat there. So yeah, so again, similar to the last one, always when you're at an air show, get in and get the static shots, because again, it tells the story of the air show, even if it is busy. It's like, you know, if I was to cut this picture out and spend all the time going through taking all these cones out and all that sort of stuff, it's just a picture of an F-35 on a blue background. Whereas this, you are telling the story. It's like, that's an F-35 at an air show, you know, and it's, to me, that's important. And I think sometimes it gets missed that, you know, it doesn't have to be perfect, a perfect clear background. It'd be nice, but at the end of the day, you know, you want to get the plane regardless. So what I'm going to do is, it is a little bit wonky, so I'm just going to level it out a bit, and I'm going to pull the crop right in on this one, I think. Just because I want it to be quite in your face. So this one, I mean, sort of, you know, if you look at your exposure's about right. So we'll try play around with the highlights, bring that sky down a little bit, just to give it a bit more life. That's nice. And what we're going to try and do is bring back some of the blacks, because it's quite a bright picture. So we'll just kind of, that's dehaze again. Just bring some of the blacks back, just to kind of make it not look so washed out. I think what we'll do is we'll focus on the subject on this one. See how much it'll pick up. That's good. That's not done too badly at all. So what we're going to do is we're going to punch the clarity on this one, really make it stand out, I think. Really sort of go all the way up, and then we'll add some and then what we can do is we can also, if we're not so happy about the people in the background, we can do a little bit with something like that. So we can look at, this is a nice little thing. You can duplicate and invert the mask. So it'll take the mask you've got, and it will, like I said, invert it, so you'll have the complete opposite. So what we're going to try and do is we're going to try and just maybe just bring those people down, just kind of add a little bit of blur to it. And just kind of desaturate them a little bit. Maybe not so much. But just what I've done there is I've pulled the focus onto the plane rather than the people behind it. So what we'll do is we'll just, there's a little bit around here where I think there's a couple of people that are not picked up in this, so we're just going to look at that mask. Let's overlay, see if there's any more I need to pick up. No, it's done quite a good job. I mean, it's actually picked up some of the aeroplane as well. So what I'm going to do is brush. Take the brush out. Oh, why don't you want to do that? There we go. It's interesting. Well, I've almost sort of kind of created like a sort of a semi bokeh effect just by blurring out the background a little bit, just giving that plane a little bit of punch in the front, which I really quite like. And what I might just do is possibly just bring the saturation down a little bit on the whole thing, just to kind of look at the vibrance. Don't want to bring that down too much, if anything. Maybe just like that. And add a little bit of contrast to the scene. Bish bash bosh, job's a good one. And then I like that. Again, we've just what we've done is we've kind of taken the focus off the people in the background, and we've just kind of brought it onto the plane in front, which is what I tend to do a lot if there's lots of people shots and the stuff behind it. I just kind of blur them out a bit, put the focus on the plane. So if this goes up on Instagram, people are looking at the plane, not the people. So it's just a nice sort of way of separating, just sort of blurring them out a little bit. So another one we're going to look at, because I'm going to probably go for a couple more for you while we're here. And I think what we'll do is we'll look at a display team. We'll look at, do you want me to, should I do the red arrows one, or should I do the Frecci Tricolori one? What would people like to see? Frecci or reds? So I think what I'll probably do is I'll probably look at the Frecci Tricolori one, just because this is one I can make kind of a red arrows. Okay, we'll go with the red arrows then. So there's a little bit of delay on the stream, so I might not catch you all in. So this is one from last year, which is the depleted red arrows display, which is a bit of a shame, but oddly it happened to be the best shot of Tornado that I've ever got. Or it's just Tornado, it's just Cyclone, I can't remember which one. But this is one of the best shots I've got. The sky was right, the lighting was right, so I've got some of my favourite shots of the red arrows from last year's React, despite the fact there's only 7 of them. So what we'll do is we'll look at this one. I mean, this one it's almost good straight from the bat. There's not a lot that needs to be done with this, really. So what I'm just going to try and do is accentuate the photo and sort of make the colours pop and make it all just sort of stand out a little bit more. So we'll start off again with the lens correction. Now where I'm going to go with here, the one I think is going to make a big difference is I'm going to go with the dehaze and just punch that a little bit. As you can see, it's brought the sky out behind it. And I'm going to see what the highlights do. Again, this is just sort of playing around. It's just kind of just to bring mostly some definition back into the smoke with this, which feels nice. I'm going to see what I can do with some clarity. So clarity adds a bit of punch, but I don't want to go too much. And what I want to do is I want to add some, to bring up the reds in this as well. So I'm going to just go over to the saturation, color saturation, and roll up the reds, which is quite nice. And also I'm going to try the blues and see if I can do that without affecting the sky too much. That's not too bad. Although I think we can probably come down. That's very good. There we go. So I'm gonna focus on the crop a little bit. I want it to all be in. So we'll go to the colours. We'll bring the brightness up a little bit, not too much. Because there's a lot of the whites, I'm going to roll the whites back just a little bit as well. And this is one I'm going to add just a tiniest touch. There we go. Temperature. And as I say, this one I enjoyed already. So this is just kind of a, it's just touching it up really. It just sort of sits well on its own. I mean, it's not. I don't want to crop it too much. I don't want to go over the top on it. It's one of those that sometimes you just get a picture where you're taking it and it looks good from straight off the bat. And this is one of those to me. It's one of my favourite shots from 2022. I mean, I have been quite vocal about what I've thought of the Red Arrows display last year, but you know, credit where credit's due. They were getting it right at the right time with the right sky conditions, and it looks like a really nice shot, and I'm very pleased with this one. So what we'll do is we'll move on and we'll do the Frecci Tricolori as well, because again, this is one of my favourite shots of last year. It's not perfect. The planes themselves aren't completely in focus, but as a whole piece, I think it works really well. I just wish that, you know, the building work of the background is what it is. We can't worry too much about that. So we'll look at the profile corrections, which again hasn't done much, and we're just gonna level it out. One thing you'll find is whether you do the auto level, it is quite good. It's not perfect. If you've got a very pronounced horizon or a very pronounced sort of straight line in there, it will pick it up even better. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just sort of balance it out. There, beautiful. Now this is one of those I wasn't particularly prepared for at the time, so I just kind of just fired away, and some of these have come out quite nicely. So we're going to raise the exposure just a bit. And now this one is a temperature one where I think it feels a little bit too yellow. So I'm going to bring that back to about there, just so it doesn't go too blue. And with this one, I think we are going to go add some dehazing. Don't want to go too far, because I find if you add too much dehazing, it starts to change colour, and we don't want the greens to go sort of too far in one direction. So it's just trying to find the right level. So I think that's there. And we're going to pull in the highlights a bit just to sort of improve that smoke. I think there's a case for pumping the clarity on this one. Not too much, just that's quite nice. It's very. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to pump the vibrance up a little bit. Maybe not that far. Just to bring those colours out a little bit more. And there, I like that. Again, it's a really rough, it's really simple edits, some of these. And you can sort of see what I've done is I've taken the image and I've really just kind of added some more sort of saturation just to make that all stand out and to show that flag really showing. I think what I'm also going to do is I'm going to add some colour based saturation. So we'll see if we can pump the reds up a little bit. And that's a little bit of orange in there as well, so we'll push that. And we'll also push the greens. Which looks quite nice. And maybe we'll look at the luminance on the red. Just to break that a little bit brighter. And that looks quite nice. I like that. And this one, I've spotted a great big dust spot as well. Just there. So I'm going to go, there's a couple on here. So I'm going to go in, get rid of them. Dust spots are another one of those things that just annoy me. If someone posts a picture with a dust spot on, it's the first thing I see, just because it's something I deal with. It's one of those things you deal with DSLR cameras, and you're constantly swapping lenses and stuff. So yeah, it's always good fun, that one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move on to this one. I think I'll probably stick with this for another 20 minutes or so. So this is another good one. This is from the Duxford Evening Air Show earlier this year, which I think is a great little event that they've put on. Sort of sunset shots. You get some really, really nice colours in the planes. So again, this is another one I was talking about, taxi shots. They are sort of, to me, key parts of an air show, especially when on this you've got the planes popped up over there, you've got the fans, you've got Duxford in the background, you've got the lovely sky. This is kind of the ideal sort of shot. So what we're going to do, we're starting off here, is we're going to balance this out a bit by starting off with the lens correction, and we're just going to level Sally B out a little bit. Yeah, shooting, it's one of those things that's always going to happen. It's especially if you're shooting at with sort of shutter speed priority, and it pushes your aperture up to sort of anywhere beyond about f/16, you're really going to start to notice it, which is something which you'll quite often do when the camera tells you that it's got to bring it out. So we've got a bit of a dust bunny up here, dust bunny situation, so that's going to go. This is the best thing about Lightroom, is being able to just get rid of them. So that's quite good. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with the exposure on this one, because this was as it was starting to get darker on the day. So we'll just bring that back up a bit. Now we want to bring that sky out. That sky is the sky is part of the winner on this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push the temperature up just a bit, and we're going to add some of the tint in, because you know that's the real star of the show. And we're going to crop in just about there. I still think we can push the exposure up a little bit. Now we can focus on the contrast in the scene. We want to go to the contrast up to, this one can probably go quite high. We go to about 20. And then again, this one I'm not going to do too much dehaze, but what I do want to do is I want to do something with this sky. So we're going to use a sky mask and see what it does. That's quite good. I like that. So we're just going to add dehaze in there. That's nice. And maybe with the tint we'll just kind of add a bit more purple into the sky. Not too much, just and then I think again this is one where we're going to focus, pump some clarity into the whole scene, just to kind of be See, I remember when I first started doing photography, I used to think that putting too much clarity in was really good, so you'd go all the way to the right. And it's the one thing I've learned is never go all the way to the right. It just kind of takes away, unless you're being deliberately sort of artistic. If you go all the way one way or another, it's never the right way to go. You always want to kind of find a level which just feels a little bit better. So what we're going to do, let's bring that clarity back down. We'll probably stick around 50 because 50 feels quite nice. And then we'll add some texture to the whole scene just because it really pumps that out. And I think what I'm going to do is going to lift the shadows just a bit in front of Sally B, just because it feels a bit. But then I'm also going to bring that exposure down just a touch, just to compensate. Now this is one I think you can get even more dramatic with a crop. I mean, I could potentially go right in, but I don't think I like it that far in. So I'm going to go back out. I think she feels a bit more majestic like that. So yeah, you're still telling a story with this one. You've got the engines turning, and you've got the fans in the crowd there. You can tell this is at the end of the summer, the really dry summer. The yellow grass which is standing out. You've got the evening skies coming in. This was a great little event. They're doing it again this year, and it's not the cheapest, but I would highly recommend it. It's one of the best things that IWM have done by putting this evening air show on. It's just great. It's the evening sun at Duxford is fantastic. Far better than the daytime sun. So to be able to just have this one event, it's worth every penny. I feel like just being able to sit there and just watch the sunset with airplanes. It's great. Really would recommend it. So yeah, this is that one. I think I'm pretty much finished with that. So as you can see, where we've gone from a relatively dark image. So what we've brought it back in. We've really made the planes stick out a bit. We've accentuated the fact that it's an evening. We've brought the evening colours in a little bit, and we could probably do even more bringing that in, but I think that would probably push it too far. But yes, that's a shot that I really, really like. I've got some wonderful shots. Some of my best shots, my favourite shots of Sally B I took on that event, and I've taken lots of shots of Sally B. So yeah, definitely worth going next year when they put it on. So this is another one we're going to look at. Now this is one where we all have shots like this where we get a really nice shot, but it's poorly composed and it just kind of ruins it. Now what you could do in this instance, you could crop in, but doing too much of a crop, it feels like it loses a bit of, it just loses that punch and that sharpness. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some sky in. Now this is something I do quite a lot, and there are multiple different ways of doing it. You can do it before the edit or after the edit. I tend to do it before the edit, but depending on how it blends in, it's one of those things you kind of work out on a shot by shot basis. So what we're going to do is we're going to basically add this area of sky and this area of sky in effectively. So we're going to go into Photoshop, and this is something I've been doing for a couple of years now. I'll try and remove these guides if I can. It's something that decided to come on the other day. I pressed a button, now I can't turn it off. There we are, that's better. Right, so what we're effectively going to do, we're going to add some sky on it. Now, there are, again, within that, there are multiple ways of doing it. There's two ways of doing it. So I'll show you them both. So what we're going to do is we're going to basically extend the canvas first. So we're going to Alt Control C to get the canvas to join us, and then we're going to extend it. We want to extend it relative to what we've got into that space. So as this is a 3x2 crop, we are going to do a 3x2. I always do inches because it just works out easier. So we're going to go 3 inches wide, 2 inches high, and effectively what that's going to do is that's going to add 3 inches over here and 2 inches over there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to crop that afterwards. So as you can see, we've got this whole area here now of extra sky that has got something to do with it. Now there are two ways of doing it. So you can either select it and do a smart tool and then go to content aware fill, and then it will bring up this where it samples the area and then gives you it, and you get sort of effectively a second layer which you then have to blend in. Now that normally works, but that's not how I like to do it now. I used to do it like that, but I prefer to do it a different way. What I will do is I will select that, but I won't just select that. I'll select a little bit into the image as well, like that. Now what I will do, rather than that, is I will delete. When I get the delete command come up, I'll select content aware, and I'll have it so it's set to dissolve mode, because I feel what that does is it fills that in, but it also brings it into the blending a little bit better, because sometimes you end up with a big line down there. But you know, again, it's something to play with. It's two different ways of doing it. It would deviate depending on the skies, the lighting, and that. It's just worth playing with. There's two different ways of doing it. The joy of this one is it just fills that gap in. You don't have a separate layer that you then have to flatten together. So there we are. We've got an extra bit of sky. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to crop it in to the crop that I want. I want it to stay as a 3:2 because I want it to go into the Lightroom is the same. So we'll just play around, just get it in. That'll be fine. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go to image size. Now what I want this to do is I want this to take it back to a 6000 by 4000 pixel image, so that I can then go in and crop it again. What this will do is this will use Photoshop's AI to take it back to full size, so that if I do decide to crop in tighter, I'm not going to lose any resolution. So what I'll do is I'll do that. And then I will save it, and this will go back into Lightroom as a second shot. Right, so as you can see there, what I want to do is I want to focus in on the paint job. But what I'll do is I'm quickly going to go in here. As you can see, where I've done that join, you can't see a join in here. You can see where the skies are different. So if I go and do that, you can see where the bits that's been added on, but it's not enough to actually show up as a difference. Now what you'll find sometimes is if you just select the white areas to delete, you'll get a big line through there where it's tried to work out to sort of make it work. But this is, you know, it works all right. Now when I said earlier you can do it before edit or after edit, if you edit more, so if you use lots of dehaze and that sort of stuff, this will become a lot more apparent that there's a difference in it. So if you're going to do a lot of editing and make a heavy edit, then extending the scene should come after the fact rather than before the edit, in my experience. So what we're going to do is I'm going to crop in a little bit more because I feel like we can, and we're going to raise the exposure, and then we're going to bring some highlights back. Now the real key for me is we're going to try and make this pop, because this is the real piece here. We want to see this. So we're going to select the airplane, or helicopter in this case. Now I'm not going to change the colours too much, the the exposure or anything on this. So the fact that this overruns a little bit isn't much of a problem. But I'm just going to do it anyway. Right, so what we're going to do is we're going to add some texture to that, and we're going to add some clarity to that, because we want that scheme to really start to pop. So we're also going to whack some vibrance into this as well, maybe some saturation. I think I'm going to raise the shadows just a little, and do you know what, I'm going to crop in even further, I think. And that is this is one of my favourite schemes from last year. I was really pleased that we got to see the check hind twice, especially given that it's going out of service, or well, I think it's now gone out of service. I'm sure one of the guys in chat will be able to confirm whether it is still in service, the Czech Air Force, or if it's gone. I feel like it's gone, or is going very shortly. But yeah, so that again, what I've done here is I've just brought the whole thing up, and so if you compare it to where we started, which was this image, you know, we've got a nice sharp image with a lot of real punch in it, and this is hands down one of the best schemes of 2022, I think. So yeah, so wonderful, a lovely shot. That I'm really pleased with this one. This was sort of towards the end of this. This was the Duxford Battle of Britain show. Towards the end of the year, I was kind of getting a bit sort of annoyed with my camera. I think I'd kind of was suffering a little bit from burnout because I'd done so many air shows last year. So I was feeling a bit kind of so about that air show. So it was nice to get something like that. I mean, I'm really tempted. I might even put the exposure up just a bit more. There, oh, that's it. That looks nice, just like that. So I'll do two more shots. I'll do these last two shots here. So again, as I've mentioned before, when you're visiting museums, do not, and air shows, to be fair, if you're at an air show museum, do not neglect the ability to go around and see other things away from the air show, because quite often you're going to get to see things that you don't normally, especially at Duxford, where they've got the maintenance hangars. I very much enjoy wandering around Hangar 2 and seeing planes with sort of bits off and hanging off and all that sort of stuff. I feel like it's nice to see. It's nice to see an airplane flying, but it's also nice to see the maintenance and under the hood, so to speak. And especially on this one, this is a P40. This is my favourite of the two P40s that are at Duxford. The obviously the brushed aluminium rather than the desert camo one. This just really looks nice. Especially it's the same as the P36. That also looks really nice. So what we're going to do is we're going to lens correction. We're going to straighten it up, because obviously you can see the racks behind it are leveled. So what we're going to do is I think we're going to bring the highlights down just a touch. Raise the exposure because it's quite dark in there. But also what that's done is that's brought in a bit of noise, so we're going to just roll off the noise a little bit. Not too much. Just play around with the crop a little bit. Again, I think we're going to hit the texture. And then we're going to add to the clarity on this one, I think, just because I quite like it. And this is another one where I think I'm going to use a radial filter just to kind of remove some of the background a bit. Not too much, just a little, just to kind of bring it down a little bit. And what I might do is try and straighten these up a little bit. So I'm going to see if the automatic transform tool will work. Normally it works quite well. See what it does. Yeah, there we are. So it's leveled it off a bit. This is particularly good if you're working with buildings. It just kind of levels and straightens things up where it feels like it needs to, where cameras don't pick it up properly. That's a nice nice edit there. I'll add a bit more in. I think this one I might remove some of the saturation just a little bit. There. And again, never ignore the opportunity to look at an aeroplane sort of at rest effectively. Again, this is one of those other ones. I mean, I'm quite lucky because I live not far from Duxford, so I'm able to go multiple times a year. But it's always shots like this that you just kind of... It's nice to have a different perspective. So you can always have it as like a... If you were talking about American warbirds or something and you wanted to have like a run of shots in a photography competition or whatever, these are the kind of shots that are quite nice to have to side, because when people go to an air show, generally they'll just take pictures of aeroplanes flying. So if you pick up stuff like this, it's really nice, just a little bit different, just to it's not the same old thing. So that is a shot I really like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave you with one of my favourite events of last year, which was the Lightning Twilight event. This was I think we paid £20. It's at RAF Bruntingthorpe, the Lightning Preservation Trust. They effectively parked up and gave us an engine run of their Lightning, and this was a really fun event. Several of us from AvGeeks Assemble decided to go, and we bumped into sort of a lot of the community turned up there, to be fair, which was really good. It's good to see it so well supported. So what I like about this shot is you've got the sun setting in the background, you've got the burner in the background, and you've got the sort of the starburst coming off of the lights. So this is a really nice shot. Now what I did with this one is I cropped in quite far, because there was a guy sort of moving around here, and he was sort of getting in the way and just sort of blocking out the nose. And because I did these at a fairly long exposure, I think this was like a how long was this one? This was a 3-second exposure. It wasn't one of the longest exposures I took, but you saw him waving around and blocking everything. It was a bit of a pain in the ass, so I cropped in quite tightly. But yes, you've got the burn, you've got the lights. So what we're going to do is we're going to see what we can do with this one, just to make it punch a little bit more. We're going to try and make the most of the colours and sort of try and make that plane pop. Unfortunately, you had the fence behind it, but again, you know, these things can't be helped. So we'll look at the lens correction. Now, I'm not going to crop this, I don't think, but we are going to start with the exposure. We're going to raise the exposure just a little, probably not too much, probably about there. And then we're going to run the highlights and see what the highlights will do, because they'll bring the sky back in like that, and they'll make the burn and the lights just a little bit nicer. So I'm going to add a bit more in on the tint, just to accentuate the fact that it's a sunset. We'll add a bit more of the oranges in. And so what we do is we'll look at whack some texture in. Some clarity, not too much because it will just kind of overrun it. And we'll see some vibrance, just to add some more to the sky. That's coming out quite nicely. A little bit of saturation just to make everything look nice. We'll do a quick check for dust bunnies. There, we've got some. And that's quite nice. What I will do when I add it, I'll show you one of the reasons why I don't like sharpness, using sharpness to sharpen my images. So if you sharpen, I find it just sort of adds a lot of unnecessary noise in. you can just sort of see it there. It just feels a bit false. But what you can do, you can be selective on where you want to sharpen. So obviously at the moment it's sharpening everything. Everything in that image is being sharpened. But what you can do is you can control it, and it will show you how to do it. So what you've got is you've got this masking tool here, and that effectively it acts like, well, it says it's a mask, and it will pick up elements of the plane that you want it to, or the subject that you want it to sharpen. So what you want to do to be able to see that, you want to hold down your Alt key and slide it, and now everything that's white is being affected by the sharpening. So as you'll go through it, you're now getting to a point where all your sharpening are the edges. So you can go as far as you want, and that will really just kind of just sharpen the edges like that. So it's, you know, it's one of those things that I use it on some images, but not all that much. I just feel like it just does a bit too much. But you can, yeah, so you do have a control. So in theory, only those areas in white will be being sharpened. I don't necessarily believe that. Sometimes I feel like it still makes it noisy everywhere else. But yeah, that's one of the tips you can use if you do want to use sharpening, but want to try and preserve the image without it being too grainy. So that's one thing you can look at. But yeah, as I say, sharpening is just not for me. I prefer it to sort of be a bit more au naturel, for want of a better word. So I'm just trying to. One thing I don't like so much this bottom here. There's quite a lot of noise. Well, not noise, but it's just busy at the bottom here, and I don't like it. So I'm gonna adjust my crop. Now, what you've seen, what I've done so far is a lot of time I've stuck to 3:2, which is not a hard and fast rule. I do change it from time to time. It just depends on the image. So this one, I want to make it a bit wider. So this isn't gonna. I don't think it's gonna be work as a 16:9. I feel like I mean, it could work as a 16:9 crop, but it feels a bit, I don't know, just a little bit cramped if I do that. Now, one of the crop factors I do like is one I just kind of made up, to be fair, and it is 5:3. So it's quite similar to a 6:4 or 3:2, but it's just a bit narrower. So you're not completely losing the top, you're not completely losing the bottom, you're managing to keep sort of everything in. And I feel like it's a much more balanced crop. But as with anything, crops are subjective, I think. You can do a lot of different things. Now that Instagram is beyond the square, you can do a lot more with it. And obviously if you put it in a photo book, I tend to crop it to suit the photo book. So it might be a 16:9, 1:1, 5:4, 4:5. You know, whatever it is to fit it in. But yeah, so I think what I've done here is I think I've made this punch a lot more. The colours have come out. If you compare it to where it was quite a flat image. So what we've done is we've just added a bit more life to it, I suppose. It just feels a bit more kind of punchy. So yeah, this is another one I'm happy with. And this one, if they put on these engine runs this year, I could highly recommend going. It's a great little event. It's great to be surrounded by other people who are there for the same thing. Sometimes you can find as you go to an air show, there's lots of sort of families go, which is not that I've got a problem with that, but this is something like this is very driven towards the aviation enthusiast. It's nice to be surrounded by other people with your hobby. So yeah, it's a great little event, and I can highly recommend it. But in terms of this editing session, I'm going to draw it to a close. You've had me for the best part of 2 hours. So thank you very much. You can YouTube will save this down, and you'll be able to watch it back in some glorious high resolutions if you want to dip in and out of it. There is a previous one that we did, which was about the Mac Loop. So do feel free to come back and like, share, subscribe. You can find me over at RS7 Aviation or Rob Sluicer Photography. They're all on my, if you go to my aviation Instagram, they're all linked through there anyway. But yeah, it's thank you for your time. Head over to AvGeeks Assemble on Instagram, AvGeeks Assemble on Facebook. We also have another AvGeeks Assemble YouTube, which has got sort of various different videos and shorts on it. This is mainly for the live streaming, so if you haven't yet, like and subscribe this one. Drop the notification bell so next time we go live on something like this, you'll be able to see it. But from me this evening, thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you again. Cheers. Bye bye.